Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mobardi. Today is Friday, March 29th. Happy Friday to everyone. And today we are going to be covering a variety of different things, starting with the Sweet 16 matchups that just took place last night in college basketball, a handful of upsets that we're definitely going to want to get into, and then we are going to be following that up by talking about some NFL draft buzz. We had the pro days of both J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix Jr. that have a lot of people raving about the potential of them not just being first rounders, but how high in the first round could they possibly go. So we will discuss that, as well as the proposition that's really been circulating around the online atmosphere about the potential of the Arizona Cardinals deciding to draft a quarterback in the first round this year. I'm going to dive into not just the idea of should they or should they not draft a quarterback, but what should they do as they currently sit at the number 4 overall pick in the draft. And then finally, we are going to wrap up the show by talking about the biggest moments from MLB opening day. So we will be getting into all of that. But before we do, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you may be keeping up with us. To our live viewers, to be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happening in sports and make this show as interactive as possible. And as well, if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the link gsmcpodcast.net to do so. Absolutely anything would be appreciated. But now, getting into our first segment of the day, talking about the Sweet 16 from last night, where, like I alluded to, some surprising upsets in this round. Yesterday I gave some picks for what I thought was going to happen in the Sweet 16. Not a very good start for myself. Went 1-3 in those games. So hopefully for you and all your brackets, you're still hanging in there. I still got a chance in my pools, but I'm gonna need some things to break my way, starting with Purdue losing tonight. But as far as last night's games, we will start with the number 1 seed falling in the tournament this year during the Alabama-UNC game. Bama ends up winning 89-87 in this one, a high-scoring matchup, which for Alabama is exactly the type of game that they like to play in. Last round, they had a little bit more of a sloppy on both ends, a little bit more in the mud game against Grand Canyon that they came away, but this is really their strong suit, is when the pace is high and the shots are flowing, Alabama tends to win those games, and that's what happened last night. It was Grant Nelson who was really the player of the game, the hero down the stretch for the Crimson Tide, where he had a season-high 24 points, scoring 19 of those in the second half. His scoring output in the second half included a personal 7-0 run, the go-ahead and one layup with 39 seconds left in the game, and the free throws to ice it at the end. But it went more than just the offensive side of the ball for him, where he also had a massive role on defense, where he had 5 blocks, including 2 in the final couple minutes there, one of which coming in the final moments of the game, where he played terrific defense against R.J. Davis on back-to-back possessions. On the first one, he spiked a R.J. Davis shot, where Davis even said after the game in the post-game press conference that he thought he had the advantage there. Grant Nelson definitely did not see it that way, as he blocked him then, and then coming out of the inbound, he locked R.J. Davis down again. So this was just an example of how Alabama, when they needed to get stops, they actually did a really impressive job. And their defense does deserve credit for their approach to this game, where yes, UNC still scored 87 points, but when they needed stops, they got them. And I thought it was very interesting by Nate Oates to sort of try and coax UNC into playing their type of game, leaving some shooters open from three, some of their worst shooters, and sort of adjust through that. Grant Nelson, like I said, was very impactful on defense, partially so because of the fact that they were trying to match him up on players that they could afford to give a little bit more space to. He was matched up against Elliot Cadeau for a lot of his minutes. Cadeau, just a 19% shooter from three this season. Him and the team as a whole played off of Seth Trimble, who has given them some really nice minutes this season and has been a little bit of a revelation for them. And he did improve his shooting this year, but still not a high volume guy. And as a result, they were able to pack the paint a little bit more and make things more difficult, putting extra pressure on RJ Davis, who was one of the best players in the country this year, but he did not show that in this specific game. They held him to just 4 of 20 from the field, 0 of 9 from 3. And for Alabama, I do still feel like if their offense doesn't show up, they could be in a little bit of trouble. I haven't been the highest on Bama, so, I have my foot in my mouth a little bit today because of that. But that being said, they are incredibly dangerous in any given matchup because of the fact that their offense, far more times than not, does show up for them, and as a result, they find themselves in the Elite Eight. And what's so good about them is the fact that they are very diverse in their different attack strategies. They have a bunch of different guys who can get theirs. Mark Sears, of course, one of the candidates for SEC Player of the Year this season, and he was still good. He scored 18 points in this game, but was held to just 4 points in the second half. It was obviously Nelson being the headliner in this one. Interesting to note, though, that Nelson had just 6 points in the past 2 tournament games combined, and Aaron Estrada is also a terrific option for them. Some of the moves he makes in the lane and in the interior it's really fun to watch. It's almost a little bit classical, where he's going with some hook shots, like a running hook shot he hit yesterday. It's very fun to watch. And again, this whole Alabama team as a whole can be extremely dangerous on any given night because of their offense. And they now are advancing to the program's second ever Elite Eight. So awesome to see there. This is a tough one for UNC. Not going to spend too much time on it, but they were very commonly thought, even as the teams were seeded, that they were a little bit of the 1 seed that was the most vulnerable come the tournament, and they are the first one to fall. Now we have a couple other 1 seeds playing today to see if they will be standing alone in that category to not reach the Elite Eight. But a very solid season, but they had their highs and lows. Their defense, which was so elite at the beginning of the year, showed signs that, in certain matchups, they just could not hang as well as they once were thought to. And this was a little bit of the issue for them in this game, and they end up falling in a shootout. But great careers at UNC for both RJ Davis and Armando Bacot. Ends on a bit of a sour note for them, and RJ Davis especially because of the game that he had. But ultimately, you do have to look at these careers and talk about how good they were as a whole. Made it to the championship game a couple years ago. Couldn't get the national championship, but still no slouches whatsoever. But the thoughts of UNC having to face off against their other former star, Caleb Love, are dead. And not just because UNC lost, but because Arizona also got upset last night. So we will be diving into that game as well. Clemson got out ahead early in this game and put together another really convincing performance here, where they led by as much as 13 points in the first half. Arizona, on multiple occasions, started to put together some runs, but Clemson just kept responding, and I thought that Brad Brownell, the head coach of Clemson, did a really good job of using timeouts to try and stunt the momentum that they were gaining, to put in different looks, and they were able to control this game most of the way through. Arizona grabbed their first lead of the game at the 14:33 mark in the second half. Clemson came right back down the court and knocked down a three from Jack Clark to retake the lead. Arizona then tied it again a few minutes later, but Clemson responded with a 9-2 run. And Arizona really just couldn't overcome the level of defense that Clemson was playing. Both teams went scoreless following the next 3 minutes after that 9-2 run from Clemson. And we saw the looks that Clemson was running in terms of running a lot of zone, trying to almost coax Arizona into shooting perimeter shots. Umar Ballo was causing them some problems on the interior, so they tried to pack the paint a little bit more. And, I mean, for their sake, I guess you can call it a little bit of luck, but the rotations on the perimeter were also really good. But Arizona was not able to knock down their threes. Clemson is now holding opposing teams to just under 19% from three during their tournament run, 14 of 75 total. And Arizona was a contributor in this past game as well, where they took a handful of shots, and this is one of the best offenses in the country in terms of points per game. But when the threes aren't falling and you're relying on them so much, it is not a recipe for winning. And they went 5 of 28 in this game to contribute to Clemson's spectacular run on the defensive end up to this point. But it was Arizona's defense was the one that broke down the stretch. PJ Hall got multiple wide open looks at the rim, and it was notable. A lot of people are questioning head coach Tommy Lloyd of the Wildcats because Umar Ballo was not on the court for those instances. But at the same time, it was just a lack of communication, where it was a backdoor cut and off of an inbounds pass, just nobody guarding him, nobody in the realm. And really, the Clemson dagger came on an inbounds after Arizona scored with a little bit of time left. It was just around the 15-second mark. I believe it was Caleb Love put it in for the Wildcats, and nobody was on Joe Girard at all. He just starts walking it up the court. The back end of the defense starts overreacting, and it ends up leading to a wide open Dylan Hunter layup, who he did get fouled. The defense came a little bit late to try and contest it, but he got the and one to go, missed the free throw. But one way or another, that made it a 2-possession game with 11 seconds left in the game, and really sort of sealed Arizona's fate in that one. If they had any bit of hope, it sort of died at that moment. Arizona averaged 87 points per game this season, were held to just 72 in this matchup. So, like I've sort of alluded to, Clemson, their defense has been on another level up to this point. And we see that, yes, you just took down the number 3 defense in the league in terms of points per game. Now it is going to be another big time test for the Clemson Tigers, where they take on Alabama, who was number 1 in points per game this season. Clemson, another team advancing to their second Elite 8 appearance in program history. Alabama, Clemson, playoff game. No, this is not college football. This is actually basketball. So, really impressive stuff there from the Tigers. Chase Hunter has been terrific for them during this stretch. Just under 20 points per game on 51% shooting. Just under 6 assists per game as well. He had the incredible and one layup with 25 seconds left to go. Sort of windmilled it in, and that put them up 5. On the Arizona side of this does add to a stretch of pretty disappointing losses in the tournament, where dating back to 2016, they've lost to a lower seeded team in 6 straight appearances. They've made the Sweet 16 twice in that stretch, so not a massive indictment against them, but obviously not great. Tommy Lloyd has coached them to those 2 Sweet 16 appearances, including this year. This is his 3rd season with the team, and while it is a disappointment, he has done a pretty solid job to kick off his tenure here with those Sweet 16 appearances. Been a top 2 seed in the tournament every season since he's gotten there, and I think that they are going to continue to be a prominent team going forward. They will be making the switch to the Big 12 next season. Last couple games here, we had the East region with UConn versus San Diego State, the national championship rematch from last season, and this was an even bigger blowout than it was last year. It wasn't overly competitive in the championship game last season. This time, UConn wins by 30, 82-52. This is 9 straight NCAA tournament wins by at least 13 points for UConn. So they have been absolutely dominant. And in this game, and due to this game being the rematch from the national championship and just how dominant they've looked all season, it does have a lot of people asking, is UConn better this season than they were last year when they won the national championship? And truthfully, it's hard to say the answer is no based off of how good they've been up to this point. When they are clicking, it really does seem like it. The level of offense that Tristan Newton has elevated his game to. Donovan Clingan has stepped into that Sonogo role very well. He didn't look his best yesterday, but still a great presence for them. We'll see. I don't think he's going to be able to quite get to the Final Four most outstanding level of play that Sonogo was performing at last season, but we will see. Could have some other matchups against bigs that it could really fall on his shoulders. They bring in Cam Spencer in the transfer portal, Stephon Castle in recruitment. They've both been massive pieces for them, and they have a better record up to this point than they did last season. They won the Big East regular season championship handedly by 4 games, and they won the conference tournament as well. So kind of hard to say they're not. Now, obviously, a lot of that is going to come down to the weight of, can they win the national championship? That is still to be seen, but the Huskies are riding a 30-point win into the Elite Eight, where they will be taking on Illinois, who won the other game in that region as well. A really fun matchup between the 3 and 2 seeds in the East, where it was 2 conference champions matching up, 2 teams with different play styles and different calling cards, and Illinois being the number 1 Ken Pom offense, and Iowa State being the number 1 Ken Pom defense. But it was the offense that won in this game. Terrence Shannon Jr. was just too good. He scored 29 points, with 20 of them coming in the first half. He just wreaked havoc whenever he was on the court. Was dealing with some foul trouble in the second half, which limited him a little bit. Allowed Iowa State to get in the game a little bit more as well after Illinois started this game out hot. But he might just be the best player in college basketball, and obviously there's some of the off-the-court allegations that do sort of tarnish how we can talk about him and view him, but in terms of an actual basketball player, there might not be anybody more impactful than Terrence Shannon Jr., who continues this unbelievable stretch. And you know, it's not just him, that being said, because we saw him come off the court, and yes, Iowa State started going on a little bit of a run, but I'm a big fan of Marcus Damask as well. He wasn't even his best self last night, just 2 of 11 from the floor, 0 of 4 from 3, but you can see how much opposing defenses do respect him as well, where there were some instances where it seemed like they were trying to deny him as the ball handler so that he was not the one initiating the offense for Illinois, where I started noticing it during some of these non-Terrence Shannon Jr. moments, but there was also another play with a few minutes left in the game where somebody picked him up full court to deny him the inbound, and they were so focused on him as they were running their zone that I believe it was Coleman Hawkins who had the ball up top, was able to make an easy skip pass to that same corner of where Marcus Damask was on the wing, garnering all the attention, and Shannon Jr. knocked down a wide open three. So I do believe that Damask is an underrated piece of making this Illinois team roll offensively. Ended up being a close game as Gilbert started getting it going for the Cyclones on the other end. Again, Illinois sort of forced them to play the faster paced offensive game, and again, Iowa State made it close, but ultimately Illinois never trailed in this game, and they continue to look like a really good team. So we have the Elite Eight matchups that are slated for Saturday: Illinois versus UConn and Clemson versus Alabama. According to ESPN Bet, UConn is 8.5-point favorites, and Alabama is 2.5-point favorites. Yesterday, giving out some picks didn't necessarily work out for me. I suppose, though, if I were going to go with some gut reactions here, not a professional gambler, so don't hold me accountable if this doesn't hit. But I would probably lean with the points with UConn. I just think that they're so dominant, and I don't know, for as much size as Illinois does have, I'm not sure if they are... UConn can play both ends of the ball, top 6 offense and defense, the number one of the best offenses as well. If you look at the UConn, actually with this game, it appears that they passed Illinois as the number 1 offense in Ken Palm. So again, these numbers are always adjusting. The point is, this is 1A, 1B in terms of offensive teams, but Connecticut is significantly better on defense. They're going to need Klingon to be better, but I would probably lean with UConn and the points in this game. And honestly, for the other end, I feel like I'm setting myself up for failure by going against Alabama. At some point, Clemson's going to fold, but I think Clemson can maybe cover this spread and make it a close one. I don't want to keep betting against Alabama and making a fool of myself, but I do sort of lean Clemson in this one. But lucky for me, I am not a gambler, so I have no money attached to this, and I wouldn't recommend going near it because I do think that is going to be a very fun and intriguing matchup that could go either way. But we are now going to be taking our first break of the segment. When we come back on the other end, we're going to be getting into some NFL draft buzz surrounding the quarterbacks of J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix Jr. following their pro day. Probably do a little bit of big picture stuff as well. So stick with us and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits some losing shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We just finished up talking about last night's Sweet 16 games. We continuing to watch those as all these storylines develop there. But now we are going to be switching into some NFL talks with some pro days that have taken place over the past couple days that have some of these maybe once considered outside of the tier 1 quarterbacks really making some noise and some buzz with JJ McCarthy and Michael Penix Jr. They both had their respective pro days with their programs, I should say, and both of them really impressed and have a lot of NFL scouts buzzing. There was a report, so just big picture here, JJ McCarthy for a handful of weeks, really since the season ended, has been rising up to the top of some of these draft boards, and people are saying that he could potentially fall into the top 4 in the draft based off some of the meetings and such, but also just looking at the physical tools. No, he does not have the most impressive statistics out of this quarterback class, but people are a little bit more taking into consideration the situation that he was in Michigan, the fact that they were operating it's a team game, obviously, so as much as you'd like to see the prospect flash themselves, if you're Michigan here and you're Jim Harbaugh who is coaching the team, if you have a run game that can get you 5 yards per carry, why would you throw it all that much? And ultimately, that sort of is why JJ McCarthy didn't have the eye-popping numbers. Now, you can interpret that a couple different ways. Again, you can look at the fact that in the moments that he was asked to step up, his third down numbers were really impressive. Some of the physical tools that he holds, being able to use his legs a little bit more and be mobile while also having some solid power on his throws as well, being a decent outside the numbers thrower as well. There is a lot of stuff you can talk yourself into with JJ McCarthy, but you can also spin that situation in a way. Well, I mean, the reality is, and I think that this is a little bit more of a definitive statement, we have not seen him with the entire weight of the offense really on his shoulders. And again, you can't say that that is his fault personally, but it is something you can consider a little bit in these draft conversations as well. Now, again, not out of his control. Maybe he is fully capable of that. We just haven't seen it necessarily. And the third down numbers would possibly show that, yeah, he can, but we will have to see about that. Michael Penix Jr., I feel like from a talent point is just as impressive as JJ McCarthy, if not even more, with some of the arm talent that he showed during the year. I mean, he can let it go deep. He is incredible outside the numbers, and he's not the most mobile player in the NFL draft in terms of quarterbacks, but in terms of understanding an offense and being able to execute it, I do think Penix shows a lot of flashes. He was, for a lot of this offseason, considered to be outside of the first round, considering the fact that his medical history is a big red flag with him as a prospect. Had multiple season-ending knee injuries as well as dealing with shoulder injuries as well throughout his college experience, which is concerning for sure. But Penix also, we know that the talent is there with him, and despite a little bit of a disappointing national championship game, the way that he was able to lead Washington throughout the course of the regular season was very impressive. And even still in the championship game, it didn't help because his offensive line sort of collapsed on him. That was a very impressive Michigan defensive front, which played into that as well. But ultimately, there could be something there with Penix. Personally, for me, I think him being a lefty, him having the injury history he has, and some of the lack of real improvisational skills during his college experience would have me a little bit hesitant to take him in the first round. But if he also ends up working out, I would not be shocked either way. But I want to start with him and his pro day because that just took place, I believe it was yesterday, and it had a lot of scouts buzzing. There was a story that came out on Bleacher Report that NFL insider Jordan Schultz got a text from an anonymous head coach saying that he is locked in as a first rounder. He ran a 4.51 40-yard dash, jumped 37 inches in some of the vertical tests as well. It was 36.5 to be exact. But I mean, we know that he is athletic, and some of the mobility is, I don't think it's impossible. I feel like it's probably somewhat related to the fact that he's just a little bit more cautious in this all, and he's not quite as, dynamic in those quick burst movements, which is also not, the number one concern for a quarterback prospect anyways, so it shouldn't be a massive deal. But I do wonder a little bit. I think he plays a lot like Tua of the Dolphins, and I say that, I know it's a little bit of a lazy comparison because of the left-handedness of it, but those are sort of the similarities. It's not that he's a negative athlete. We know that he is athletic. It just seems like some of the surrounding stuff in a game situation, the reality of the situation is Michael Penix Jr., and when you're drafting a quarterback in general, I don't think that the 40-yard dash is all too significant of something that I would go off personally because, in an ideal world, unless you are coaching the likes of a Lamar Jackson where the run game is the forefront of sort of the building blocks around him, and I know Lamar's improved a lot more as a passer, which is why I like him a lot more as a quarterback now than I did when he was first coming into the league. But I just don't think that acceleration in a 40-yard dash, a straight sprint, is what I'm personally looking for in a quarterback. It's definitely does not hurt you if you can run a fast 4.51, but that's why the fact that he is now locked into a first-round pick does sort of surprise me. And I've seen some mock drafts, and the idea is that maybe a later first-round pick where he could potentially be drafted to the Rams is a team that I saw him in a mock draft with, but he's going to be visiting a handful of teams. Curious to see how this is all going to play out. I know the Broncos and Raiders are some teams that he is going to meet with. So we'll see how this all plays out. Again, I definitely don't want to fully discredit the talent level of Michael Penix Jr., but I do think that there are some red flags with both of these quarterbacks, and even if you go up to the top tier of QBs, there are some red flags there. So further goes to show that drafting a quarterback prospect is an extremely difficult thing to do. You can never really, there's no such thing as a sure thing really when it comes to the NFL draft, and especially when you're talking about quarterbacks. But it is a very interesting conversation. So in terms of fits for these players, again, I know that maybe, I think with Penix also, you do have to keep in mind, I don't want to overplay the left-handed factor of it all, but it is a real thing. If you talk to pass catchers, the ball rotates a different way, and I'm sure it's something that, we've seen some left-handed quarterbacks be able to perform with and put together good careers. Steve Young is obviously, the golden model of a left-handed quarterback, and he was throwing to Jerry Rice. Jerry Rice was just fine with it. So ultimately, I don't want to overstate it, but it is different for the receivers, and you also have to sort of structure your offense in a different way. All of your play calls are sort of mirrored. You have to have a dominant right tackle as opposed to left tackle, because that's now the blind side, and everything is just a little bit different. That's why I would love to see him end up in Miami. I'm also not the biggest Tua fan, but I believe that Michael Penix could do a really good job. Now, would I draft him first round if I'm the Dolphins? Probably not. I would love for them to be able to sort of pick him up in the second round. Maybe you have to trade up for that move, but I would really be curious. Tua's going to be asking for something along the lines of $50 million. Penix plays a lot like him, but I do believe in the arm talent and the throwing ability. It's the deep ball stuff with Tua is a little bit overblown, where anytime a ball is slightly underthrown to Tyreek Hill running deep, everybody is quick to point the finger at Tua. But Michael Penix Jr., I have no worries, no concerns that he would be able to deliver some of those deep balls. And also, for Tua, haven't really seen him. Now, I know at Alabama, different story, and we're talking about Penix, who only has experience in college football, but I think with a game-winning drive on the line, I don't trust Tua like that, and I just feel like bringing Penix into the building to have that be a little bit more of a competition. I know that the price for Tua is going to be even that much more expensive. If he does hit unrestricted free agency, it's going to be expensive one way or another, though, and I would rather be sure than take the gamble, end up giving all this money to him, and end up regretting it shortly. So, again, Dolphins is probably the top spot where I would want to see Michael Penix. I also would be interested in potentially seeing him with the Raiders as well. Now, their offensive line is sort of iffy. I'm not totally sure about that, but I do think that with the explosive arm that he has, Davante Adams needs a improved quarterback who can hit him down the field and get him the ball, make things easier for where Penix, I don't think there's any concern with him necessarily going underneath. That wasn't necessarily his game in college, but when you're throwing to the likes of Davante Adams, probably makes life a lot easier. So I would be curious in that as well. For JJ McCarthy, obviously the number one mock for him has sort of shaped into the Vikings because of the fact that the Vikings acquired another first-round pick from the Texans, and it seems like they are a prime candidate to try and trade up in this draft. I don't think that Chicago is going to be moving. Chicago will not be moving on from their number one overall pick. Otherwise, they would have kept Justin Fields. So they're definitely taking a quarterback. It sounds like the Commanders are just about locked into taking a quarterback as well with the number 2 overall pick, which sort of leads people to think that it is probably they go for that number 4, maybe the number 3 spot, and JJ McCarthy has been receiving a lot of love in terms of the connection to the Vikings. So I can't say that would be a terrible fit there. I don't know what the perfect team for him to fall into is just yet, but sort of on that note, I want to take a break here, and when we come back on the other side, get into the idea of him going to the Cardinals, where that has been a big topic of conversation as of late, where there was a mock draft or a proposed move about the Cardinals taking JJ McCarthy 4th overall that has been circulating the internet and making a lot of rounds. So I want to touch on that. So we will be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other side, we will be getting into what the Cardinals should do with the number 4 overall pick. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We were just touching on the NFL draft buzz surrounding some of the quarterback prospects in J.J. McCarthy and Michael Penix Jr., which takes me into this next segment about what the Cardinals should do with their upcoming draft pick. They are currently sitting at number 4 overall, and there have been a lot of discussions lately about the idea of them potentially taking a quarterback with that pick. Mike Tannenbaum of ESPN threw out the idea of they should draft J.J. McCarthy with the 4th overall pick and trade Kyler Murray. So I wanted to sort of dive into that discussion. To me personally, it doesn't sound great to me, where first off, you are inherently trading a quarterback where I'm not the biggest fan of Kyler Murray, and I know that he's going to be making as much money as he is, almost upwards of $50 million in some of the coming seasons. But at the same time, his value is so low right now because of all the injuries that he's been dealing with. He did come back late last season after suffering a torn ACL in the 2022 season. But this is the former number 1 overall pick that you ended up giving a $230 million contract to just a couple years, and I think it would be a really bad look for them. Now, ultimately, you can't look too much into how is this move going to be perceived. You have to ultimately do what is right for the team. If this is what they feel like is right for the team, then so be it. Do what you have to do. But I also do think that Kyler Murray has shown flashes, and I'm going to defend somebody that I haven't been the biggest fan of through his career. I just don't know how much of an upgrade really a J.J. McCarthy would be. You are inherently selling low on a quarterback that was the former number 1 overall pick that you gave all this money to, that it's going to be difficult to move him. You saw with Justin Fields the trade market there, where another guy that could have some upside but hasn't fully shown it, and some of the contract situation that surrounded him was the concerning aspect of it, and in turn they got just a 6th round pick, the Bears did. And for the Cardinals, I don't think you could get anything valuable really for this contract in Kyler Murray. I feel like you're way better off just rolling into next season with Kyler, and they saw enough from him that they felt the need to give him this contract. When he's fully healthy, he is a very effective quarterback, and it's been some years since we've seen that, but he showed those flashes early in his career that sort of, garnered the reason for them to go out and pay him all that money. And again, I didn't love the decision at the time, but he made a couple Pro Bowls. He was the offensive rookie of the year his rookie season, and I don't think that he is bad necessarily. Now, do I know if he's franchise level to the amount of money that they're paying him? I definitely don't. But again, to trade him off for nothing doesn't seem like a good decision in my eyes, especially for then taking the 4th quarterback off of the board. The risk reward just does not seem there for me. I believe that Kyler is better than J.J. McCarthy, and maybe I'm a little bit lower on J.J. McCarthy than a lot of people are. I can see the path with him to succeeding, but I just don't necessarily see it myself, and I don't see the need to make this type of a risk when The smarter thing for them to do probably is to trade this 4th overall pick and end up getting draft capital in the long term. The Cardinals are a team that I think is going to take a step forward this season, naturally just with Kyler Murray returning from injury, actually having a training camp and playing, but also the fact that they're now settling into this Jonathan Gannon system where I do believe Jonathan Gannon is an incredibly talented defensive mind and should be able to sort of maximize the players on that defense. They have this 4th overall pick that you could put a generational receiver prospect in Marvin Harrison Jr. with Kyler Murray. Kyler, when he won the Offensive Rookie of the Year award, he had the final season of Larry Fitzgerald, who was, of course, Hall of Famer. Yes, he was older at this point. And he was specifically 36 years old. So wasn't the prime Larry years, but was a solid addition for them. They had a young Christian Kirk as well, so they had some weapons. As of late, they haven't really had that, and bringing in Marvin Harrison Jr. could help elevate Kyler Murray to some of those high-performing levels that we saw early on in his career. Now, I think that if you don't want to go that direction, I would also, if I'm the Cardinals, rather trade down and receive multiple draft picks in the future than, again, make this transaction where you are selling low on your biggest asset, essentially, and you are taking a shot in the dark on this quarterback while still not having any weapons around them. As it currently stands with the Cardinals receiving core, now, I'm sure they are probably going to look to add at least one receiver in this very talented, deep draft class, but the overall offense is still not very talented. Michael Wilson had a very solid rookie season for them, but still a long way to go, and that's your number one option as it currently stands. Greg Dortch has had some moments. You have James Conner in the backfield who was dealing with injuries last year. When he's healthy, of course he is definitely an effective player. But Trey McBride as well at tight end had a nice season for them as well. But overall, I just don't think that the infrastructure is really there that it makes sense to, again, go through this move where you are potentially downgrading at a position and not doing anything. Now, again, if they are fully sold on J.J. McCarthy that he is going to be an absolute franchise guy, who knows? All power to you. I just feel like it's a huge risk that is, goes poorly and the GM loses his job like that. Like, in a second, he's gone. So we'll have to see how this goes. I always look back to the 2021 class in terms of what type of draft capital could you potentially get for a top pick like this. The Dolphins got 3 first-round picks from the Niners in that class so they could trade up for Trey Lance. Now, this is one spot back as well, so we'll see. I feel like there's also this other argument if you want to spin, maybe they could move up in the draft to potentially, whether JJ is going to go higher up on the board than we expect, or if they want to go get the likes of a Jaden Daniels. It's just, that's even going in the wrong direction where you're giving up assets to make this move that may be lateral, maybe a downgrade, still doesn't really have any definitive evidence that it's going to work out for you. The Cardinals are still a very young team that's trying to find their own, and I think this would be way too drastic for them. It would be one thing if Kyler Murray had the type of value that you could get some high draft capital. I just don't think that that is the case now. I believe Tannenbaum also threw out the idea of trading, and I don't have the exact mock trade in front of me, so I'm just sort of going to speculate a little bit on it, of the idea of them trading Kyler Murray to the Vikings It would probably take some first-round picks as well from the Vikings in this mock trade, but I don't think that they would do that. I really struggle to see how this all works out necessarily in a way that is a win-win to anyone. I mean, if the Cardinals could get both of the Vikings first-round picks in this deal, then I can't say that would be a bad move necessarily. If you get to shuffle, you get multiple first-round picks this year, 3 first-rounders as it currently stands. You maybe get your new quarterback. You try and reset up in this new Jonathan Gannon team, but I feel like that's a little far-fetched. I don't know if Kyler Murray could go for 1 first-round pick, let alone 2. Maybe. I don't think the Vikings are necessarily all that desperate. No, they don't have a quarterback as it currently stands, but I feel like they would probably rather go ahead and take J.J. McCarthy at the 4th overall pick and trade those first-round picks because of the cheap contract than going out on a limb for Kyler Murray and the type of contract that he has. So I just don't think it lines up really for any of these teams that are being talked about. As far as what I think the Cardinals should do, I mean, ultimately, I feel like if J.J. McCarthy is going to be a shoo-in here in the top 4, it's probably just the most worth it to try and get as much draft capital as you can, ideally in this coming draft as well, so that you can get a swing at one of these top wide receivers that are in the class. It won't be Marvin Harrison Jr. maybe, but there's still tons of wide receiver talent in this class. You go and you get at least one of them. Plus, you know, they just did some shuffling on their offensive line as well. Maybe we'll see what plays out there, but they do need a lot of talent on the roster. I like what Jonathan Gannon did last season to have them be a competitive team. Were they good? Ultimately, no. But they were in a lot of these games, even with Josh Dobbs starting at quarterback, who lost his job to Nick Mullins. As much as some of the Dobbs moments from this season were electric, ultimately, this team was right along the lines of a 4-13 team, but he still had them playing hard, and there's a lot of moves they need to make before they become a real competitor. And I think that in part of that is playing out the season with Kyler Murray. See what you have. Jonathan Gannon has not been able to, I know he's more of a defensive specialist, let him evaluate what there is in Kyler Murray going forward in this season and figure it out from there. I don't know how much worse Kyler's draft stock can really get. He's set to make $49 million against the cap this season. He gets slightly cheaper next season, so maybe there's a little bit more of a window for the Cardinals to move on from him then. He's also set to make $55.5 million in 2026. So trading Kyler doesn't really have any glaring spot. Oh, this is the time where it is the best time to move on from him. But I feel like this is probably the worst time to move on from him with all the injuries that he has been dealing with up to this point. There isn't an out in his contract until 2028. So it seems like they're stuck with him a little bit and stuck with somebody who could end up being good. Again, not that I've been the biggest fan of Kyler up to this point in his career, but if he stays healthy, there is plenty of talent with him. And I think that there is a path for him to sort of work out still as well. They're going to need an actual receiver, which is why Marvin Harrison Jr. would potentially make a lot of sense if they choose to stick there. But I guess we'll have to see what the front office decides on that one. But we're going to be taking our final break of the show. When we come back on the other end, going to be diving into some MLB with opening day taking place yesterday. We will get into the biggest moments there, so stick with us and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We are headed into our final segment of the day. Going to be talking some baseball, and the MLB finally have opening day in the books. We got 13 games. 2 of them were postponed due to rain, so the Brewers and Mets and the Braves and Phillies games were both pushed to today. But 13 games, had a handful of exciting ones and big-time moments from the opener, so we are going to dive into those, starting with the Yankees versus Astros game that took place yesterday. The biggest offseason addition for the Yankees in this one, in Juan Soto, was really the story of the day because of the fact that he had the late game heroics, not offensively, but on the defensive side, where he made a great throw from the right field to throw out Mauricio Dubon at home plate for what would have been the game-tying run. To sort of set this up, it was the 9th inning. The Yankees led 5-4 after one of their other big offseason additions in Alex Verdugo hit a sac fly in the top of the 7th to give them that 5-4 lead. In comes the 9th inning. Clay Holmes enters for the Yankees. He allows singles to both Dubon and Yordan Alvarez, setting up the Astros with runners on first and second with just 1 out. Kyle Tucker steps up to the plate, the lethal hitter that he is. He drives one into right field, where then Dubon decided to try and test the new Yankees outfielder, and it did not go well for him. Soto ends up throwing him out at home. Ultimately, this play was reviewed, so, maybe you saw something different than the umpires did, but ultimately the call was upheld. I thought it was a fine call. I was listening to the Astros broadcast at the time where they were a little unclear, but I do think that they got the call right in this situation, and that was really the game-saving play for them there, where Soto was the key piece in all of it. He finished his Yankees debut with 1 hit, 1 RBI, 2 walks, but again, that outfield assist was really the play that welcomed him into the Yankees culture and showed that he is going to be a significant contributor of the team. I'm curious to see, because we did have a commenter on a video that was released yesterday worrying about the fact that Soto is going to sour on the organization, that he's more of a me-first guy. I don't know how much I've really heard that narrative up to this point. Now, his time in Washington the past few seasons, I can't blame him for being a little bit frustrated with the organization. He comes in his rookie year, just 19 years old, and is the best, at least the best offensive position player on the team to help lead the Nationals to the World Series in 2019. But since then, the Nats haven't really done much to surround him very much with talent. And I also understand he has been, since the moment he stepped in the league, one of the most impactful players in the league. Now, he then goes on to San Diego, where they have this massive payroll, and really I couldn't explain to you why San Diego was as bad as they were last year. They had all these big contract guys, and all of a sudden they ended up falling apart. Really, it was they never got it together, and we were looking late in the year. It's like, okay, is this the point where we're going to see them turning it on? And that just never happened. So in order to cut some costs, they end up trading him to the Yankees, and I guess we'll see where it goes from here, but he's been a pretty reliable player over the past handful of seasons, and curious to see how this plays out. Again, in New York, I believe that the top-end talent between Judge and Juan Soto is just about as good as you're going to get with any team in the MLB in a lineup. Obviously, you have the likes of the Braves and the Dodgers who would like something to say about that. But again, top-end talent-wise, it's there with Judge and Soto. How much are the other players going to be able to step up in these scenarios? Yesterday, you got some production from the bottom of the lineup in Volpe, who had a nice game for himself, in Verdugo, who ended up, like I mentioned, driving that run in with the sac fly off of some Judge action earlier in the inning as well. So we'll have to see with them. And as far as pitching wise, it is also a little bit of a concern. Nestor Cortez wasn't great in this game, and they're, of course, without Garrett Cole for the next month or so. We'll see when he is fully able to come back. He's supposed to be reevaluated mid-April, I believe, is the timeline for him. But Cortez got hit pretty hard in the first couple innings, was ultimately able to settle in. I would never overreact to, one start out of a 162 game season. I've never been the overreacting type necessarily. I say that all the time when talking about NBA. Overreacting to one game of the MLB would be entirely hypocritical there, but there are probably some question marks surrounding the Yankees and what they're going to be able to do from a pitching staff as a whole, especially in the absence of Garrett Cole, so that is something I'm looking forward to. But enough on that game. We also had the reigning champ Texas Rangers play off in a thrilling game against the Chicago Cubs that went into extra innings. This game could have potentially gotten a little controversial because of what happened in the ninth inning, where the Cubs were up at bat, and it was Miles Mastronobi up at the plate. He swung on a pitch. It appeared that he had made contact and fouled it off. Jonah Heim, playing catcher behind the plate, he had fumbled it. It passes by him. He becomes adamant that it was that Mastronobi made contact with the ball. While he's arguing with the home plate umpire, the Cubs come around and Bush ends up scoring the go-ahead run to make it a 3-2 ball game at the point. So that was a little bit controversial there. Lucky for the Rangers, Travis Jankowski came through for them in the bottom of the ninth, ended up hitting a solo home run to even the score. Game goes into extra innings, and it was Jonah Heim after this play where, again, I can't blame him for, it looked to me like it was a fouled ball, but to not track the ball down first before going on this argument with the umpire, I believe was a mistake. It ended up costing them a run, whether it was, the umpire's fault or not. Sometimes you just got to play through with, no whistle necessarily, but you got to see the play through, and Heim did not do so in this instance, and it led to what could have been the game-losing run, but ultimately Heim comes back in the bottom of the 10th and hits the walk-off single, so nice little redemption for him there. But I was really interested in this game as well. It was in terms of, the overall baseball season officially starting, we of course had the Dodgers and Padres in Seoul, but one of the first national broadcasted games of the year. One was on ESPN, and I was tuning in because I was really curious to see the debut of Wyatt Langford in the MLB. And I gotta say, pretty impressive stuff here. It's not that his stat line necessarily sticks out all that much, but still, you could see with the plate approach, he went up for his first at-bat and did not swing at a single pitch, just sort of let himself settle into the moment, so he ends up striking out in this instance, but ultimately you could see the wheels sort of churning with him, and he was just sort of trying to settle into the moment. And then from there on out, he ended up being a very solid player. His next at bat, he got underneath a slider, I believe the pitch was, and he hit it deep. Now underneath, popped it up a bit, but still good enough to drive in a run there. So he got his first ever RBI. And we also saw him with his first ever hit on an infield play, where, keep in mind, this is somebody who played catcher for the Florida Gators a lot last season. He's a really true rookie when you look at it. Drafted with the 4th overall pick in 2023. He was able to beat out beat out the ball for an infield single. He drove it towards the shortstop and ended up winning the race to first base, and showed that, yeah, he can run too. So he is a very interesting prospect to me. We talked yesterday about the odds for Rookie of the Year. I ended up going with Evan Carter, who did sort of struggle in this game, both in the field and at the plate. Again, just one game, so not an overreaction, but I thought it was very encouraging stuff here from Wyatt Langford. He had a chance to walk it off right before Heim did, actually, in the 10th inning, but he was not able to convert in that situation. But still, one way or another, a pretty encouraging performance from him there. Now, he was just slotted in the designated hitter position in this game, so we will eventually see him playing out in the field more. In left field, I believe, is where he's supposed to play. That's where Evan Carter was yesterday, so I'm not sure necessarily where they are going to arrange him at. He had a pretty tough play in the outfield in that one that misplayed the ball, ended up leading to a triple for the Cubs that ended up bringing in their first run. So again, we'll see how the Rangers choose to sort of stack up their young pieces as they continue to try and defend their championship run from last year. But that's all we really have time for today. Tons more baseball to get to as the year progresses, but we will get to all of that as it comes. So as of now, that is all we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning in to the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. We will be back on Monday. Reminder to like, follow, subscribe, and keep up with us when we come back on Monday. We will have updates on who is going to be playing in the Final Four in Phoenix, as well as all other types of storylines. So have a great weekend, and we will see you then.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great.